What's going on, everybody? Zane here, back with another video. For this one we have the array change problem. You are given an array of integers. On each move we are allowed to increase exactly one of its elements by 1. Find the minimal number of moves required to obtain a strictly increasing sequence from the input. So looking at this example here, we have an array of 1, 1, and 1. The output will be a 3. The reason for that is because to make this an increasing array, we would need to increase this element here by 1, making it a 2, and then we would need to increase this element by 2, making it a 3. So we added 1 here and then added 2 here, so 2 plus 1, 3. That's the essence of this problem. Taking a look at our function here, we have a int function passing in a vector of type int. And what we need to do is scan through the arrays, or scan through a array, and do something with the element that we're at and the element before it. So let's actually conceptualize this in Sublime. Let's first include our IOStream as our standard library. We're also going to include our vector library because we have a vector of ints. Let's open up our main function here. And I'm going to add in a test case, so it'll be a standard vector of type int, and it'll be an array, and it will be, let's just use this example here, it'll be the 1, 1, 1, so it'll be 1, 1, 1. So the output for this should be 3. Okay, so again, our output's supposed to be a number, so let's create a variable for that. We'll do int answer. We'll just set it to 0 because it's an integer. Okay, now what do we want to do? We want to look at our arrays. Given our test cases, we're going to have multiple arrays, but for this one, we just have this one array here. And what we want to do is loop through the array and check to see if an element that we're at is less than or equal to its previous element. Now, in order to do that, we would have to actually start at the index 1, not at index 0. That's very important for this one because we're not going to be concerning ourselves with the 0th index element, because that is going to be our starting point for whether or not the next value will be increasing or not. So this is very important. We're going to be starting at index 1, not index 0. So going back to our code, we're going to be looping through the array. So let's do that. For int I equals, and we're going to be using I equals 1, not I equals 0, because we want to be comparing the previous element with the element that we're currently at. So int I equals 1, I is less than the array.size, and I plus plus. Just a standard for loop here, except for the change of I equals 1 instead of I equals 0. So now what do we want to do? We want to look at this array. We're going to be starting at this one, and we're going to say, okay, is this one here, the middle element, is this one less than or equal to the previous one? Because if it's either less or equal to the previous one, that tells us that it's not strictly increasing. Just like the problem says, this one must be a strictly increasing sequence. So it cannot be equal to, and it definitely cannot be less than. Which is why when we do this, if the array at I is less than or equal to the array at I minus 1, that should trigger our code to do something. So again, if our array at I, which is this one here, is less than or equal to the previous one, then we need to do something with this element. What we also need to do is add to our counter, or our answer here, how many times we're going to have to add a number, or how many times we're going to have to add 1 to this element to make it increasing. So what I mean by that is, if we were to do the, let's actually do this. I'm going to write this out here. If we have our element here, or our array here, So I'm going to do, the array is, let's actually do this easier. We have, wow, 1, 1, 1. That is probably the worst array you could probably see right now, so I'm going to change that up. Let's do 3, 2, 5, sure. So what do we need to do? We're first going to be checking our ith index, which is index 1, which is the middle element. We're going to be saying, okay, is this element less than or equal to the previous element? So is 2 less than or equal to 3? Yes. So that's where this part of the code comes in. Whoops, where's my cursor? Has disappeared. Cool. Wait a sec. There we go. So if we go back to here, 2 is less than 3. So here, 2 is less than 3. So then we have to do something, considering this piece of the code is checking if it's going to be an increasing array. So considering now that this truly is less than 3, we need to figure out how many moves, or how many ones, in a sense, can we add to this 2 to make it increasing. So how can we find that? Well, we can just conceptualize it and be like, well, if we want to make this increasing, we would just need to add 2 to this to make it a 4. So this should be a 4 then. And that way, it will then be an increasing sequence of 3, 4, 5. But we don't want to just conceptualize it. We want our computer to do it. So in order to get this 4, what we can do is we can actually take the element that is at 3 over here. So we'll do the previous element minus the element that we're at. And then once we get that, we add 1 to it. So what this is doing is this is taking the previous element, subtracting the element that we're at, and that will get the number that would require this value to become the same as the previous value. That's why we add another 1 to the answer here, so that we can make it increasing, not just equal to, we want to make it increasing. So I hope that actually clarified things, but let's go into the code. This might be a little easier to understand. So if the array that we're at is less than the previous element, then what we want to do is we want to add to our answer what the difference between those elements are. So it will be the array at I minus 1. We're doing I minus 1 first because it's the larger element and we don't want any negatives. So we'll do, basically we're doing 3 minus 2, and that's how many numbers it would take for the values to equal each other. So to make it increasing, we just need to add 1. So we've added this to our answer, but now it's going to have to reiterate through the rest of the sequence, or rest of the array. So in order for the iteration to properly take place every single time, we need to now update the element at I to be exactly this. So again, we're going back to this. So this was our original. This is less than 3. To get the number of values we need to add to this, or what do we need to add to this to make it increasing, we just do the previous element right over here minus the element that we're at. And then once we get that value, we just add 1 to it. So then this will tell us not only how many times or how many numbers we need to add to the value to get the increasing sequence, but then we also change that element to be that larger value. So now we're setting basically this element I, we're setting the 2 to 4, so that when the iteration occurs again, it will have this new number to go off of. So now that we have that all set up, all we need to do is return our answer. And considering I'm using Sublime, I'm just going to print out the answer instead, so that we know that this should output 3. And there we go. So let me now just return answer. I'll go back to this here, and let's paste this in and run the tests. This didn't work because I didn't change this. Run the tests. And there we go. So I think the biggest thing here is being able to conceptualize how to start our for loop at a specific index and then use the logic of the previous element to our advantage. Then we just subtracted the previous element with our current element, added 1 to make it increasing, and then took that value and also set it to our element that we're checking. And that way it'll keep iterating with the updated elements and provide us with the final answer here, which will be however many times we need to add to our numbers to make them strictly increasing. Anyway, that's it for this one. So if you guys have any questions, comments, or feedback, please let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, hit that like and subscribe button, show me some love, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.